All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep. We're going to trace this incredible, complex web of ideas, a story that connects global power structures to, believe it or not, a hidden spiritual war. It's about who might be pulling the strings, how they do it, and what they're really after.
So let's start right here with this core idea from the philosopher Olavo de Carvalho. To be invisible is of the very essence of power. Just think about that for a second. The real power, he's saying, isn't the stuff you see on the news every night. It's the hand you don't see, the one that operates from the shadows, shaping events while all of our attention is focused somewhere else. And this idea, this preference for invisibility, that's the thread we're going to pull on today. It connects everything.
Okay, so where does a story like this even begin? Well, Carvalho makes this really interesting point. He says that once Western thought kind of unplugged itself from any higher transcendent order, it got stuck. It started swinging back and forth like a pendulum between two extremes. On one side, you've got this industrial drive to just dominate nature, to bend it to our will. But then on the other side, you get the complete opposite, this new age impulse to just submit to nature, to dissolve back into it. He argues these aren't really opposites at all. They're just two sides of the same materialistic coin, two reactions to being left alone in a world with nothing but nature. So that leads to the obvious question, doesn't it? If there is this invisible power, who are they? Who are these architects allegedly working behind the curtain?
And what's so wild is that when you dig into the research from totally different sources, you've got a respected historian like Carol Quigley on one end and an author like Eustace Mullins on the other, they all end up pointing to a remarkably similar cast of characters. We're talking about this interlocking network. Think the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg Group, massive foundations like Rockefeller and Ford, and of course the big Wall Street investment banks. The theory here is that these aren't just separate little clubs. No, they're supposedly all nodes in one big, interconnected ecosystem where the real decisions get made long before they ever hit the headlines.
And look, this isn't just an outsider's idea. You have people on the inside who've alluded to this. Take this quote attributed to Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter: "The authentic ruler of Washington is invisible." Wow. He's suggesting that even at the very top, there's a sense of a power structure that's not on any official chart. It's that same theme again, right? The real power is the power you don't see.
Okay, so if those are the alleged architects, what's their playbook? Let's move from the who to the how. How do they actually translate this hidden influence into real-world control? A key strategy you see mentioned over and over is a simplified version of something called the Hegelian dialectic. Now, that sounds academic and complicated, but it boils down to something incredibly simple: problem, reaction, solution. Here's how it's said to work. You want to push through a policy that you know people would normally reject. So first you create a problem, or you really hype up an existing one. That creates the reaction: fear, public outcry, people demanding that somebody has to do something. And then you step in with the solution, which just so happens to be the exact policy you wanted to implement all along. And you can see this model applied in the real world. A classic example, according to geopolitical analysts like F. William Engdahl, are the color revolutions. Step 1, the problem. A target government is pressured into making unpopular economic decisions that cause pain. Step 2, the reaction. Widespread protests erupt, but they're often organized and funded by outside NGOs posing as grassroots movements. And step 3, the synthesis or solution. The old government gets toppled and a new one that's much more favorable to the network's interests, is installed. Problem, reaction, solution. But here's where it gets even crazier. What if the problem itself is a complete illusion? This is what former Romanian spy chief Ion Mihai Pacepa claimed in his writings on disinformation. He argued that the entire fall of the Soviet Union was a grand strategic deception, a manufactured death designed to make the West lower its guard. Think about that for a minute. The most powerful move isn't just solving the problem. It's controlling the narrative of the problem from the very beginning. Now, this battle isn't just fought geopolitically. According to thinkers like Carvalho, the real war is for culture, for our hearts and minds, and it's waged in our institutions. He highlights two key strategies:
First, you have Antonio Gramsci's long march through the institutions. The idea here is you don't need a violent revolution. You just slowly take over the culture, the universities, the media, the arts. If you change the culture, the political change will follow naturally. Then you have the Frankfurt School, which is described as a more direct assault, using critical theory to deconstruct the traditions and values of a society from within. Both are methods of shaping reality, not with force, but with ideas.
And this brings us to the deepest and, frankly, most challenging part of this whole narrative. We've talked about the who and the how, but now we get to the why. If the goal isn't just about money or political power, what is the ultimate purpose? Why go to all this trouble?
Because what these sources suggest is that the ambition is way bigger than just material gain. They argue the project is fundamentally metaphysical. You could even call it religious in nature. It's about reshaping not just our world, but what it means to be human.
And a huge piece of this endgame, as researchers like Jay Dyer and Courtney Turner point out, is a technological project to achieve immortality. You have influential figures like investor Peter Thiel, openly talking about using technology to solve death. They're essentially framing it as a technological fulfillment of the promise of resurrection. And this sets up a huge direct conflict, doesn't it? It's a man-made technological salvation versus a traditional spiritual one.
So, how on earth do you make such an audacious vision a reality? Well, there's a fascinating philosophical strategy for this called hyperstition. It's the idea that you can basically write the future into existence. You create these powerful, compelling fictions, sci-fi narratives about AI gods and uploading your consciousness, and by embedding them deep in the culture, you start to pull reality toward that outcome. You literally try to make science fiction into science fact.
So what's the philosophical justification for all of this? Well, in an interview, the researcher J.K. Ultra explains a worldview that's common in a lot of esoteric traditions. It's a kind of pantheism where God isn't a separate being, but is the totality of everything. In this view, for that universal consciousness to know itself as light, it needs a shadow. It needs opposition, darkness, even what we call evil, to create contrast and define itself. From this perspective, all the conflict and control aren't negatives. They are the necessary engines of cosmic self-discovery. It's that same Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, solution, just blown up to a cosmic, spiritual scale. So now we're faced with two completely different operating systems for reality. On one side, you have a worldview that sees all of history as a process of universal consciousness discovering itself through conflict, all leading to a kind of man-made godhood. But on the other side, you have something else entirely. And here is that stark counter-narrative, coming from orthodox thinkers like Bishop Ignatius Brian Chaninoff and brought to the modern day by Father Seraphim Rose. From this perspective, all the spectacular technological and so-called spiritual phenomena, they're not signs of a new enlightenment. They're signs of a very old prophesied deception. They're described as just empty spectacle, a monstrous, meaningless play acting designed not to enlighten, but to fascinate, to confuse, and ultimately to seduce.
And the Orthodox tradition actually has a precise technical term for this exact condition. The word is prelist. It means spiritual deception or spiritual illusion. It describes a state where, usually because of pride, a person starts mistaking their own ego-driven feelings or even demonic illusions for the grace of God. It's the state of being deliciously, fatally wrong and feeling fantastic about it. So, having laid out this incredibly complex web of political, cultural, and spiritual warfare, our sources don't just leave us there. They conclude not with another theory, but with a proposed framework for how to see clearly.
The response begins with a diagnosis. In his famous Harvard address, the great writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn identified what he saw as the core weakness of the modern West, a fundamental decline in courage. A spiritual failing, he argued, that leaves a society vulnerable to these very kinds of deceptions.
And building on that diagnosis, Father Seraphim Rose offers what you could call a practical toolkit for discernment to guard against that state of prelist. And it's really a call for active awareness. First, to test all spiritual phenomena instead of just passively accepting them. Second, to avoid trance-like states or just channeling information without any critical thought.
Third, and this is a big one, to be really wary of any teaching that flatters your pride with promises of secret, special knowledge. And finally, to always look for purpose. Is a supposed miracle actually serving a good, rational end, or is it just an empty magic trick? This framework is presented as a crucial guide for navigating what they see as a very deceptive reality.
And so that's where we're left. All of these threads, from Carvalho's hidden power structures all the way to Rose's framework for spiritual discernment, they ultimately converge on this one final question. In an age of total information and sophisticated psychological warfare, what if the most important skill isn't about knowing more things, but about developing the clarity to simply see what's real?